Hey everyone, welcome back to Comic Culture. Have you ever wanted to get into comic books but you just don't know where to start? In today's video, we're going to go over how you can get into comic books effectively today. Welcome back. So today we're going to go over some tips on how you can get into comic books today. Have you been watching the MCU movies or the DC movies or the various TV shows on the different streaming systems out there and always thought, hey, wouldn't it be interesting to get into comic books, but you just don't know where to start? Well, I have a few tips here I'm going to go through to get you from where you are today to having a great collection like this one. So tip number one, think about what you already enjoy. If you're watching the MCU movies and you like a particular character, or you had some childhood favorite superhero growing up, that's a really good place to start because most likely they have a current run or an existing run about to come out soon. I would really suggest not listening to speculators or trying to figure out what the key issues are. And when we talk about key issues, we're talking about major events, major first appearances of certain characters or other storylines that have huge significance and long-term impact on the story or character. There's lots of different resources out there to help you pinpoint what key comics are, especially when they're older comics. And there's a lot of speculation on what's going to be a key comic later. But for now, I would just focus on things you enjoy. Say you're a lifelong Batman fan, but you love the movies, you love the animated TV show, why not start there? There's a great Batman run on right now, and there's probably always going to be a Batman run. He's just such a popular character. There's always going to be 5-6 different Batman runs going on. I would suggest sticking with the main one. The main runs, and your local comic book shop can help you with that. But you can branch out to the other ones too, because there is great content on those side runs. Another thing to think about is, do you want a more superhero approach to your comic books, or do you want something else? Are you someone who enjoys novels or other kinds of books? So pull from past experiences and see if you want to go down the more mainstream route or the more indie route when it comes to your comic books. On both sides, you're going to get really, really great stories, but there is a little bit of difference in just the vibe that you get either way. So let's say you wanted to get into Batman, but you notice there's 100+ issues out right now. Well, you have some options there too. So what you can do is you can either pick up right where it is right now, and you can pick up single issues. And single issues are just what they sound like. They're just individual stories or individual comics in a single issue. So for instance, here's my Carmen #1. So this is just the first issue of the comic. But you have another option too. You can pick up what's called a trade. So a trade is a collection of different issues strung together. So for instance, here's my Walking Dead book 13. It has many, many issues included inside of this. So it's not just one comic book. It's many comic books combined. And you do pay the price for it. Something like this would run $25, $35 for a series of comic books, whereas a single issue like this can run you anywhere between $2.99 and we've seen up to $7.99 for a single issue. So to recap tip number one, I would say start with what you know. Start with what you think you would enjoy. Pull from past experience. Do you want a more mainstream superhero approach? Do you want a more independent approach? And pull from characters that interest you. Go to a shop and see what's available there, and then you can start building your pull list, which is where we're heading next. A pull list is a great way to stay on top of current runs in comic books. There's a couple different ways you can build a pull list. So you can either build one at your local comic book shop, which you can just Google on Google Maps and figure out where your local comic book shop is. And there's many different online retailers too that do the same thing. My Comic Shop and Midtown Comics are a couple examples of digital pull lists you can set up on the websites. So say you wanted to get into that Batman we talked about earlier, and you don't quite know where to start. Well, you can contact your local comic book shop or set up an account on these websites and tell them you want to add Batman to your pull list. Probably the main run to start with. So what will happen is every Wednesday on New Comic Book Day, that book will automatically be put into your file at the comic shop or in a queue at the website. And then you'll receive that book based on the shipment frequency that you selected or the next time you show up at your comic book shop. It's a great way to ensure that you're going to get the books that you want to get. So set this pull list up in advance and then come back to the shop and pick your books up week to week and you can stay up to date. The great thing about a pull list is you can add and remove books whenever you want to. So if you get news of a new series coming out in a couple months, call your shop and add it to the list or go online and add it to your list. A bit of a warning about a pull list though, sometimes the comic book shop or the online retailers might not get the books in from the distributors on time. So sometimes there could be delays based on weather, or most recently in the past year, the pandemic we were under. So just be aware that if something's missing or damaged, it's likely not your comic book shop's fault. It's probably that the distribution was off. One other thing I'll mention about a pull list is if you set one up at your local comic book shop, that store owner is going to be relying on you to purchase that book because you've kind of committed to them that you're interested in, that you will buy that book. So it's not great to add a whole bunch of books to your pull list, and then the day you show up, you say, I don't want those 5 or 6 books, because they bought them just for you in that instance. That might be more of my own philosophy, but I think it's just good practice as a customer. So we talked a little bit about what to pick when you're starting to read your comic books. And we also talked about how to kind of stay up to date and stay current and develop a pull list online or at a local comic book shop. So tip number 3 is going to be more around the release schedule of comic books, because they all just don't come out at the same time. Typically, your books can be weekly, bi-monthly, monthly, or even quarterly. And again, it depends on if you're choosing single or a trade version of the comic. Now, trades come out a little less frequently because those books have to come out on the shelf as single issues first, then they're combined towards the end into a trade. So I guess the tip here is, if you're going to only subscribe to a couple books and they're all monthly, don't expect a lot at the store every Wednesday when you come in. This can help set your expectations as far as how much you're going to be reading month to month. And so maybe you want to choose books that have different release schedules or add additional characters to help fill in gaps throughout the month. Tip number 4 is about looking ahead. How do you know what's going to be coming out 2, 3, 4 months from now? Well, there's a couple good sources for this, and I'll just touch on a few. There's a variety of websites out there that you can use to help you forecast your comic book purchasing. I'll put a few in the description below. Another great resource, though, at your local comic book shop is the Previews book. The Previews book is the book that they publish every month or so, and it kind of looks ahead to the next 2 or 3 months. And you can get a good idea of what's coming out from practically all the publishers. Marvel sometimes has their own insert, and then DC sometimes has their own. But the other independent publishers are all found in that big, thick book. Your local comic book shop may have a purchase order form that you can look through, or they might have some other way that you can order books that are far in advance. So ask them what's the best way for you to tell them what kind of books you're looking for if it's way in the future. So tip number 5 is, so you have all these single issues and everything, how do you store them at home? I'm assuming that you want to kind of keep them in the condition they were when you bought them or read them, and you don't want them just rolled up on the floor. Perhaps you do. If you do, great, ignore this one. But if you want to keep them in a good condition, these are some basic tips that you can follow. So a bag and a board is a very basic way of just storing your comic books. And what I mean by bag and board is, this book right here, Carmen #1, is inside of a plastic sleeve with a white piece of cardboard essentially behind it. It keeps the book flat, and it keeps the book protected from dust and dirt or any other liquids that might spill. So when it comes to bags for your comics, there's a couple different options, and I won't go into detail about it, but the basic options are your thicker, heavier Mylar bags right here, and then you have something here called polyurethane bags. And so the poly bags are a little bit thinner, a little bit cheaper. They display great as well, but I tend to put my higher grade books inside of the Mylar bags just out of personal preference. So if you followed those tips, you should be able to figure out what you might want to collect, single issues, trades, which characters, which series I might want to look into or be interested in. You should know how to go to your local comic book shop or to a website like My Comic Shop or Midtown Comics and set up a pull list so you can have books automatically be sent to you or held for you to buy. You'll understand the release cadence of different books to help set expectations on how much you're going to be reading that week or month. You should be able to look ahead and see what other kind of series are coming out soon that you might be interested in that you can add to your pull list. And you also know how to properly maintain and store your books once you buy them. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, leave me a comment down below. And please also hit that like button, the subscribe button, and that bell notification in case you haven't already. It lets you know when I put out a new video. This will be the first of many videos of a playlist that I'm going to put together about how to get into comic books today. It'll teach you all the basics and some intermediate tips and tricks that I picked up along the way so you can start collecting your comic books effectively.